Thank you, Dave. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Okay, thank you for joining us tonight. Let's all begin by centering ourselves just for a few seconds here. Take a comfortable seat. Let's take a deep breath, expanding our diaphragm, relaxing our bodies, closing our eyes, and drawing our attention to the point between the eyebrows, slightly above the horizon. And let's offer a silent prayer to Infinite Spirit, to whatever form you relate to the divine, asking for guidance, for the presence of that divine light in your life, in all our lives. Let's hold that meditative state now for the next minute. Om, peace. Thank you again, friends, for joining us tonight. The title of this talk, I think, is The Sacred Science of Kriya Yoga. Before we jump into the topic, I want to talk a little bit about myself, then about the teachings, the source of all of this, and then share a little bit more. We'll also have a brief guided practice as part of this session. My friend Lakshmi, who's now behind the camera, will join us and lead that brief meditation. And we might have time for a couple of questions toward the end of the talk. I'll also share a link as I'm speaking. Through this link, you'll be able to enter your email, and receive the copies of the two ebooks that I mentioned, that's mentioned in the event description. One is the Autobiography of a Yogi itself, which maybe some of you have already read. You can find physical copies either at East West or on their website. And the other is a collection of articles and writings of Yogananda and also our spiritual teacher, Swami Kriyananda, called The Sacred Science of Kriya Yoga. So both of these ebooks you can have for free, and when you give your email in that link, which I'll share later during this talk. Now, to tell you a little bit more about myself, as you can see, I grew up in India. I was always spiritually drawn. I cannot tell meditation was as natural to me growing up. I did try, and I was always interested to learn more. Right after my college, about the age of 22, I read the Autobiography of Yogi. Interestingly, this is a very famous book in case you have not already seen or read this. If you have not, there is a treat waiting for you because I cannot recommend this book enough. Interestingly, I bought this book when I was only 11 years old. That's a whole other story. Just was a series of accidents, and I was drawn to this book and I bought it, but it was not something, let me just say, it's not 11-year-old reading material. It was not easy for me to grasp at that age, but then I was eventually ready. Right when I finished college, I graduated and I started working. I must have been 22 or maybe 23 at that time, which is when I read this book from cover to cover for the very first time, and it was a life-transforming experience. It is so for most people who read this book, and certainly it was for me. I felt deeply touched. There was an instant recognition of something as belonging to me, the teachings, and Paramhansa Yogananda, the author himself, recognition of it as being mine. And immediately when I got back home, I was traveling when I was reading this book. As soon as I got back home, I signed up to take meditation lessons in the tradition of Yogananda. And I started learning, which is the tradition of Kriya Yoga. And I started learning and practicing. And one thing led to another. And behold, 13 years from then, I'm in front of you giving this talk. A lot happened between then and now. I moved to the US, moved to this country. I was living in India at that time. I moved here 10 years ago, and I went to graduate school, and I moved to the Bay Area soon after that. And I worked for Fortune 500 companies, as Dave just introduced me. I was a management consultant for some years, and then I served as an IT services manager. I mention all of this not because somehow these credentials are noteworthy in themselves, but just to give you an idea of the fact that I've had the perspective of also being in those places that perhaps most of you are, of dealing with the kind of things that we go through in Silicon Valley or wherever you're watching this from, of navigating the world of corporate jobs, of busy schedules, of various responsibilities and all of that. And somehow the light of Kriya Yoga, of meditation and these practices helped me through all of that. And for the last 3 years, I transitioned out of that career and I spent full time serving Ananda and this work of Paramhansa Yogananda. Mostly I teach and I do other things at the Ananda Center in Palo Alto. So it is a pleasure again to be speaking with all of you. If you are local to the Bay Area, I invite you to come join us at the Ananda Center, either on a Sunday morning. You can also watch most of our programs online, even if you're not local or if you are not within driving distance. But certainly if you are, even if you're within an hour of driving distance from our temple in Palo Alto, I welcome you to join us, especially on a Sunday morning. We have a beautiful, uplifting, universal worship service that we offer every Sunday, and a lot of other classes, meditation classes, yoga classes, and many other classes based on the teachings of yoga philosophy. So I do this now, and it is a pleasure to be living this way, sharing these teachings and going deeper in my own inner life and being inspired by all the others that I live and serve with, including all of you, all of us who are drawn to the light and are looking for solutions within, for deepening our inner life, for adding light to this planet that is in great need right now. Now, jumping right into the topic, in case you do not know much about Paramhansa Yogananda or the Autobiography of Yogi, which would be rather surprising, but he came to the US, Paramhansa Yogananda came to the US 101 years ago exactly. He came in the summer of 1920. He landed on the shores of Boston. All this is perhaps very well explained in this book. I'm just going to give a brief snapshot because it sets the context for what we are going to discuss today. Paramhansa Yogananda was an emissary. He was a representative for these ancient teachings of India, what we call Sanatan Dharma or the eternal religion. Hinduism is a word that was coined much later, so it's not a true representation of what the Indian faith or the religion is, which is universal. It is not as defined or rigid as we imagine or conceptualize a religion to be. So Paramhansa Yogananda came here as a representative of this tradition, and he was not just an enlightened being who came just by himself. He was enlightened in that way, but he was also following a lineage of teachers, of gurus. And it all started with this great yogi by name Mahavitar Babaji. He's a very famous character for anybody who has read the book because there are a lot of interesting stories about him. He is said to be living even now in the Himalayas. This is where these techniques, these teachings of Kriya Yoga have been preserved for hundreds of years. So Mahavitar Babaji is the first in the line of teachers, and he still lives in the Himalayas, it is said. We don't have, a lot of people have seen him, a lot of people have had experiences with him, but he's not somebody you can just go and visit. There is not a postal address that you can write to him or an email that he can shoot and get a response. He has to be approached with a sensitivity of heart and a refinement of consciousness, and there are many real accounts of people having interacted with and met this great yogi. His disciple was this great yogi named Lahiri Mahashaya, and he lived in this very ancient Indian town called Varanasi in the 1800s, in the mid to late 1800s. So he was given these sacred teachings of Kriya Yoga by Mahavitar Babaji. And Lahiri Mahashaya had another disciple. I know if you're hearing all this for the first time, it might be a lot of names, so you can just substitute it with A, B, C, and D. Lahiri Mahashaya had another disciple. His name was Swami Yukteswar Giri. He lived right outside Kolkata, which is a very big city in India, even during the time of British rule. And he learned the teachings of Kriya Yoga from Lahiri Mahashaya. And Paramhansa Yogananda, the author that we are talking about, was a student, was a disciple of Swami Yukteswar Giri. So we have Babaji, Lahiri Mahashaya, Yukteswar Giri, and then Yogananda, these four gurus. And we also have Jesus Christ in the midst. I'm going to come to him just in a bit. But this is the lineage that Paramhansa Yogananda represents. And he came to the US in 1920 as a carrier, as an emissary for these teachings. He was sent by all these masters, by all these great Himalayan yogis and saints to revive the teachings of meditation and of inner communion. And particularly, as he explains in the Autobiography of Yogi, Jesus Christ, who was also an enlightened being, obviously, the self-realized master had the intention to revive the teachings of meditation, the true understanding of the Christian teachings of Bible in the West. And as Yogananda explains, his own coming to the West was a result of that. It was inspired by Jesus Christ. So he put Jesus right in the center of the altar that he built for his work. His work was primarily based in Southern California when he lived. This was from the years 1920 to 1952. Paramhansa Yogananda was the very first Indian teacher who made US his home. A couple of other Indian teachers had visited before then, but he was the first one for whom it was very clear that he had to live and serve the West. Because this teaching that he was bringing, it was a revival of an ancient tradition, and it had to be planted in this most fertile ground of the United States of America, from where it could influence the whole planet. Today, of course, the teachings of Yogananda and of Kriya Yoga belong equally to every country. Centers and teachings, ashrams and different communities are present on all continents. But it all started, interestingly enough, at least this expression of this public work started here in the US in the year 1920 when Yogananda landed here, because this was meant to be. In the Autobiography of Yogi, Yogananda gives a better context for all of this in this long view of time itself on this planet. He calls it the yugas. I'm not going to go into great detail into all of this because it can sort of take an hour or two just to discuss that, but again, it is relevant for what we are talking about today. What he talks about is looking at time itself, time on this planet on a cosmic scale, of how we are on an ascending cycle of time. What that means is the consciousness on this planet is on its way to be more and more refined and more expansive. And in the Indian view, and also according to many great ancient civilizations like the Greek and the Egyptians, this cycle, this is cyclical. This view of time itself, that the world, our planet, Earth as a whole, goes through cycles of ascension and descension, where consciousness is gradually refining as we go on this ascending arc, and then consciousness gradually also contracts. By consciousness, I mean the mass culture, the most common denominator of how people live on this planet. It goes through cycles. So we had this very long cycle, and each cycle is 240,000 years long. So we are talking about very long periods of time, nothing that we can experience or testify with by just the view of one lifetime. Now, all of this is important because Paramhansa Yogananda talks about how for a long time we were in a descending cycle of time, descending arc of this cycle of time, and right about 500 AD we started going on an ascending arc. But even then the planet as a whole has been fairly unrefined. It has been confined by materialistic tendencies until the year 1900. In the year 1900, according to this theory, according to these teachings that Yogananda presents, our whole planet entered this new age of expansive energy, of ascending energy. He called this, he did not coin the word, this period of time is called Dwapara Yuga. You don't have to remember the name, but you can even look around, and if you were to pay close attention, look at culture, look at civilization, and a lot of things that have happened over the last few hundred years, you will see that we are in fact refining in our understanding both of our inner realities but even of our outer realities. Just think about it, how much has happened in the last 120 years since the 1900s. Electricity, magnetism, the internet, which just came like 20, 30 years ago. You cannot even imagine life without internet. Everything I'm looking around in the room that I'm sitting in right now, most of this, 90% of this did not even exist before the 1900s. But if I was here in the year 1900, I could have looked around the room and pretty much everything that I would have seen was perhaps there for 500, 600, 1,000 years. Human understanding of the world itself, of signs of the way in which we work with material realities, it was stagnant and was in a downward arc until the year 1900. Not only that, a lot of other interesting things happened in the last century, starting with the discovery of quantum mechanics, quantum physics, the theory of relativity, the theory that Einstein proposed, which was purely drawn out of intuition, where he equated energy and mass, where he said what we think of as solid matter is in fact fundamentally the same as energy. There is no reality to matter that cannot be transmuted. That was what Einstein was proposing. He then had to do all the math to prove to other scientists why what he was saying was true. But it was an intuitive realization. Not only Einstein, even other great physicists like Schrödinger or Bohr, the whole discovery of quantum mechanics, which was starting to shift our view of reality. I'm not an expert in these fields to talk about it in great detail or depth, but you can certainly even Google to see how all these newer understandings that modern physics has given us is leading us back to the ancient teachings of the East. This is what all the scientists are discovering. Anybody who works in quantum mechanics, whether it's string theory, M theory, all the new things that keep coming up every year as we go, as we are exploring and understanding more of this universe, they would all tell you this is exactly what the Indian sages, the Taoists and the Buddhists, they have been teaching for centuries. What is it that they have been teaching? That we all are energy. That what we are, the realities that we work with, are not as solid as we imagine it to be. It's not as solid as they look. These are fundamentally things that we can transform and transmute. We spoke about Yogananda's coming to the US. So his own coming in the year 1920 was a revival because the world was ready for subtler techniques of meditation, of working with ourselves, both the inner and the outer worlds. And Kriya Yoga was that technique that he brought. It was the sacred key now that mankind was ready to go to plumb the depths of that consciousness, to dive deeper into meditation, and to be able to develop awareness and control of energy on a subtler level, because the planet itself was ready for that. It is not that nobody until the year 1900 was ready for it. We are talking about the common denominator. We are talking about culture as a whole. Of course, these techniques throughout what Yogananda calls these as dark ages, they were preserved in these high ranges of the Himalayas through yogis and saints who lived there and who practiced them, but the planet was not ready to receive them. So Yogananda, by his coming to the West and by reviving these teachings, brought to us these sacred keys of meditation. Now, we have to go even farther back to understand the whole implication of all this. I'll take you to the year 1861. Again, these are stories from the Autobiography of Yogi. I'm not going to go into all of them. Like I said, I cannot recommend this book enough, and it's very, very interesting to read through all of this in the words of Yogananda. The year 1861, we look at the life of Lahiri Mahashaya, who was Yogananda's teacher's teacher. This was a man who lived in this town of Varanasi, as I was explaining. And he was a very humble householder. He worked for the railways. He worked under the English rule. The British were still ruling India at that time. And he was transferred to this remote town in the Himalayan mountains. It's called Ranikhet. So he was an accountant, and he was transferred to this very remote village where he started working. And as he describes, he didn't have much to do. There was not a lot of work happening there. And his family, his wife and his two daughters were still in Varanasi. He didn't take them along. He was living by himself. So he would just walk into the mountains and start exploring. And one of those evenings, when he starts exploring the mountains, he meets a very interesting looking man, a very young man who looked just like him. And this was none other than Babaji. I'm going to fast forward the story a little bit. Babaji explains, helps Lahiri Mahashaya. He touches him in his chest and helps him see and realize. He awakens his past memory and makes him realize that this person is none other than his guru from past lives in this understanding of the universe and the Hindu way of life. There are many, many incarnations that we go through as we learn the lessons that we need to learn, as we are constantly refining our understanding, expanding our consciousness. So, throughout many past lives, Babaji was the teacher of Lahiri Mahashaya. Lahiri, I'll call him Lahiri for the sake of simplicity. So Lahiri meets his teacher Babaji in the remote Himalayan mountains, and Babaji just casually says, you know, I was the one who instructed your manager to transfer you here. There was really no reason for you to be living and working here, and I'm going to ask him to transfer you back to your hometown. This was all arranged so that I could meet you. I could meet you here in these sacred mountains. And from then, Babaji takes Lahiri to this cave. These are all places that still exist today. You could go to India and visit the cave where Lahiri was initiated by Babaji and all of these things happened. So he takes him to this cave where they had meditated together in their past lives. And he gives these sacred teachings of Kriya Yoga. A lot happens. I'm going to, again, fast forward and skip the whole story. There are many interesting pieces I'm not going to share now for lack of time. But Babaji, in that encounter, he shares this teaching of Kriya Yoga, this ancient meditation technique with Lahiri Mahashaya, and he sends him back to Varanasi, to where he was from, in order to go back to his householder life and to share these teachings with whoever would ask. This was the revival. This meeting that happened in the summer of 1861 was a pivotal time in history where it was deemed as by the Himalayan masters, by these great yogis, that this technique could now be shared with everybody. There is this sweet conversation that happens between Lahiri and Babaji as part of this meeting, where Babaji says, this is a very sacred technique. This can take you to liberation. It can offer you complete freedom. Give it to anyone who is able to renounce all of this world in the quest for God. That's what Babaji tells Lahiri. And then Lahiri says, my Lord, if that was my criteria, it looks like I won't be very busy. I won't be initiating a lot of people, because how many are those people that can renounce and turn their backs to the world in the quest for God? We all, deep in our own hearts, might want that, might have a desire for that, but we are still held back by a lot of other considerations that we are bound by. So Lahiri, as a spokesperson for all of us, he tells Babaji, he asks Babaji, I understand that this is a sacred technique, but how about I give it to all those who are sincerely seeking and who are desirous of liberation? Can I give it just on the basis of sincerity and the attitude with which people ask? Because people are suffering. They need keys, they need ways to overcome their own limitations. They need to be able to pursue their own spiritual life and deepen that part of themselves that can lead them to that pure state of unconditional bliss. And then Babaji responds to Lahiri by saying, well, God has spoken through you, so I grant the request. So I'm talking to you here because of that conversation that happened between Lahiri and Babaji. But what are we talking about, really? What is Kriya Yoga? What are we suffering from? And what is this key that has been given to us? I remember I grew up in a city called Chennai in southern part of India. It's a very big city, and I remember I went to school. My school was a few miles away from where I lived, and I used to take a commuter bus to go to school every day. And I remember seeing this huge billboard. This was a very famous teacher who taught from the Bhagavad Gita. And he gave very large lecture series, and thousands of people would attend. He's still alive today. He was a great, I've never personally attended his talks or read his books much, so I cannot speak much about it. But I saw this billboard, which was an advertisement for one of his public talks. And this was written almost in font size 500 or 600 on this huge billboard as I was sitting on the window seat of a bus. It said, "You live by choice and not by chance." This was the line, the phrase that was written on this huge billboard as I was crossing. I must have been in 6th or 7th grade, 11 years old, 12 years old, I don't quite remember. But I knew enough language, I had enough concepts in my head that I felt I actually understood what it was talking about. You live by choice and not by chance. I started thinking about it more and more. What does that mean? You live by choice and not by chance. Now I'm being much more articulate now than I would have been at the age of 11 or 12. But I was looking around and I could see there were things happening, transpiring in my own family at that time. A lot of what we, in yogic terms, we call karmic unfoldment, of just inevitable things that happen through our own individual destinies. And I was looking at every person around me, everybody I respected, knew, loved deeply, and I was able to see that there is this strong faith and commitment to believing that we live by chance, that somehow what we experience, why we are happy or unhappy, or what we like and don't like, how I feel is a product of what I get or don't get. I want this job. I'll be happy if I get it, and I won't be if I don't. I want to marry this person. I want this marriage to work. I want my child to be better in school. I want more money. I want better health. Whatever it is, all those fundamental desires, which are very valid, there's nothing unfair or unreasonable about these kind of feelings. But underlying all of this, I could just see, I'm seeing it much better now than I perhaps did. I perhaps did not have all these words when I was 11 years old, but I could see that everybody is committed to the belief, to this faith, that they live by chance, that either life gives them what they want and they will be happy, or life will not give them what they want and they won't be happy. This is a reality. This is not just what I was witnessing. This is what we live with. That was many years ago. Now I'm in 2021 and the world is still the same. You can look around and the number of people that may actually believe that the solutions to their problems lie within are perhaps a very minuscule percentage of this population, of the population of this world. And yet, there is a part of us that knows that there are answers within, that there is something within me that is a solution to all of what I'm suffering from, all the things that are holding me back, all the things that keep my mind restless, all the things that I'm afraid of, all the things I regret, I long for, all those things that I think are going to be answered from the outside, which I'm committed to seeking from the outside. While I'm doing that, there is also this part of me that understands on some level perhaps what I'm seeking outside is within me. There is the story that Paramhansa Yogananda used to share often of the musk deer that lives in the Himalayas. This musk deer, I don't know if any of you know this, this is a real animal, this is not just a story. This musk deer, you know musk, it's a fragrance that you find in soaps and deodorants and all those other things. And this, the true musk, not the chemical that is used in products, it is actually derived from the abdomen of a particular kind of deer that lives in the Himalayas. And this is in the male deer, it's not in the females, because they are exuding that scent in order to attract their mate. And when the musk deer, when it attains puberty, it starts smelling the smell, this intoxicating smell of that musk. But this is the interesting part of it, the musk deer doesn't know where it's coming from. It's always smelling this intoxicating smell. And this is true, believe me. It goes and climbs all trees and crags of mountains and goes on the higher ranges of Himalayas. And most often, in the pursuit of that smell, the deers fall off crevices or high mountain peaks and die because they don't know where the smell is coming from. After all, throughout that entire time of pursuit, this smell of the musk was coming from inside. Now, how is all of this tying back to our meditation practice in Kriya Yoga? Because there is nothing in the outside world, no matter how much theory I talk right now, no matter how many scriptures I quote, whether it's Yogananda or the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita, this is not something that we can understand just by thinking about it. It is not something that we can realize just by reading. It is not a theory. To actually realize that change comes from within, that I would be happier. The happiness I'm seeking, that intoxicating scent of musk that I'm constantly pursuing is coming from within me. This understanding and realization can only come from meditation practices. It can only come when we are able to turn our attention away from the senses and draw it inside and focus it. And still our minds are so incessantly busy trying to grab onto things. You watch a newborn baby. I've often heard this. I've never seen newborns. I think I have. Maybe babies that are 1 or 2 weeks old or even younger than that. But I can easily imagine, when a newborn is brought out of a mother, when the nurse brings, apparently I'm told, as soon as somebody takes the newborn, the baby always wraps its finger around, whether your index finger or your thumb or whatever it is it can get hold of. We, as soon as we come out, we are trying to grab on, we are trying to hold on. We already have so much that is unfulfilled that we are seeking out on this material plane. We come into this life, we come into these bodies that look so tiny in that moment, but there is every potential, that entire destiny of that incarnation is in that tiny baby that cannot even feed itself, that cannot speak, that doesn't understand anything. But all of the potential is in that baby. Every seed has the tree within it. And that baby is now going to grab onto everything that it can find to seek all that is unfulfilled within it in order to find that elusive scent of musk, in order to find that happiness. And that's how we lead life. Think about it. It's almost incessant. It doesn't stop. All the things that we keep worrying about, that we keep planning, that we keep desiring for, all the hopes, all the regrets, all our fears, all our longings, things we like, things we don't like. I'll just turn off the heat for a little bit. Maybe it's getting a little warm here. No, I'm a little too cold. I'm just going to turn the heat up a little bit. We're always trying to fix the world around us so we can just be a little more comfortable, a little more happy, so we can find that perfect state of peace by adjusting things that are around us. And here, these yogis, these great sages come to tell us, you can do all the adjustment you want, but what you're seeking can never be found outside, because that musk that you're being intoxicated by is after all inside you. So you have to go within. You have to draw that energy away from the senses. And that's what Kriya Yoga helps us do. And how is Kriya Yoga different from any other meditation, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's the Vipassana or all the other techniques, all of which are very valid paths. It's not the path itself that has any flaws or any limitations in it. But there are certain fundamental principles of meditation that we want to understand from the right perspective before we even think about what is the right technique or the path for me, what works for me and what is actually what I need, which is that introspection and thinking is not the same as meditation. Oftentimes, even when we are observing thoughts, even when we are detaching, which is the fundamental principle of how we practice mindfulness, and which is also the basis for how Yogananda began the teachings of Kriya Yoga, the very first technique. Just in a bit, Lakshmi is going to lead us in a brief meditation on how to detach and how to become that observer in order to touch upon that deep state of stillness within. Even when we do that, we have to understand that this mind that we are trying to detach is constantly being drawn out. Indulging in our thoughts is not going to take us where we want to go. Meditation in itself is not simply a practice of introspection or contemplation. Now, English words are so layered, and because of the kind of language English is, and because of the confluence of cultures and all of this, the word meditation can be used to mean so many things. You know, you tell somebody, are you planning to come for this trip? I'm going to meditate on it. Or you tell, an office colleague, how do you plan to solve this problem? Somebody might say, I don't know if people really say that, but I'm just saying the word could be used in various different contexts. So sometimes meditation can be confused for that practice of introspection. Even when we are sitting in that stillness, sometimes people use visualization or imagery to go to that place of comfort or happiness where they can go into deeper states of relaxation. But as Yogananda explains, as the teachings of yoga explain, from the teachings of Patanjali, the great sage whose Yoga Sutras are the very first existing that we have today, very first literature on yoga, we draw all the teachings that we share as part of yoga from his writings. Meditation is more than that. Meditation is not simply the act of introspection. It is the act of drawing our energy deeper into our spine. And the word energy is the key here, because the fundamental misconception I'm addressing here is if we do not pick it up from the right thread, we get confused in thinking that meditation is passive, that I just sit here and close my eyes and I get to take a break. In a sense, yes, we do get to take a break from this incessant chatter of the mind, but we don't just get to lose our awareness. We don't just get to step away into a zone of being passive. What meditation is actively concentrating our energy. It is a form of relaxation. So there is no tension. There is no physical movement. That's why in meditation we even, externally shut down our senses. We close our eyes. We are most often, people are not listening to anything. A lot of us even wear headphones, noise-proof headphones that sort of help us be in that silence without needing to hear sounds around us. We are not moving. We are not experiencing anything on our skin. We are stilling our body. We are shutting our senses down. Now, it is important for us to remember that it is also a vital ingredient of meditation to work on the level of energy, to be able to concentrate that energy, draw that energy into the deep spine. I've mentioned the word spine a few times in the last 30 minutes, but I'm not talking just about the physical spine, if it's not already evident to you. Now, this is where we drift slightly into the metaphysics of these teachings and of yoga itself, because the teachings of yoga tell us that there is this astral spine. Just as we exist on the physical level in these bodies, we also have subtler layers and levels of existence. Beneath this physical body is a dimension of energy, the astral dimension, where there is an astral body. And this physical body is a projection of that. Just as Einstein discovered in the beginning of the century that the energy is the fundamental nature of matter itself, and that's what the yogis also told us for thousands of years. This astral dimension, our own energetic personality and reality, is what is projecting the physical body. Now, even if that's too much for you to grasp or digest, you can leave it aside, but it's important for us to tune into this idea of that energy flowing in the central meridian in our body, what we call the astral spine. And when we are sitting in meditation, we are disconnecting that energy from the senses and drawing us deeper into the spine. And we are concentrating in these higher centers, especially the point between the eyebrows. This is how Yogananda taught meditation. And this is what the fundamental principle of Kriya Yoga itself is, which is that we are able to draw ourselves deeper and deeper into this perfect stillness that is there within us. In the Autobiography of Yogi, there's this famous chapter called The Science of Kriya Yoga. This book is free, by the way. You'll get a copy when you sign up through the link that I'm just going to share with you in a bit. But you can also read it online, because it is open source and you can easily find it. And I think this is chapter 26 in the Autobiography of Yogi, where he shares the subtler principles of this Kriya Yoga technique that I'm talking about. And Yogananda goes to the extent of saying, I'm going to just quote him instead of paraphrasing. He says, introspection is an unscientific way of trying to force apart the mind and senses tied together by the life force. Again, I'm going to read it because there's a lot that he's saying in that one sentence. Introspection, or sitting in the silence, is an unscientific way of trying to force apart the mind and senses tied together by the life force. The mind is tied to our senses, to the physical body, to the physical plane, through this flow of life force, what we call prana, what we call chi. It's known by many names in various traditions. That chi, that prana, that energy that we are talking about is that link that ties our mind, the thinking mind, with that physical plane, with our body and our senses. So introspection cannot force apart the link that is between the mind and the physical body. And even though you might think the thoughts that are drawing you away in your own meditation, what distracts you, what makes your mind restless in meditation, is perhaps not things of the senses. If you were to think more deeply about it, it is a distraction of the body itself, of everything that the mind worries about, starts planning, or even just starts drifting into subconscious states. It all happens because that energy is being drawn out through the body. And Yogananda goes on to say, the contemplative mind, attempting its return to divinity, is constantly dragged back toward the senses by the life currents. Again, I'm going to read it again. The contemplative mind is constantly dragged back towards the senses by the life currents. So if we are simply trying to observe in a state of passivity, or stepping away, or just zoning out, that's a common phrase I've heard, it does not help us touch those deeper states of stillness, or able to fundamentally transform those seeds of habit patterns that are holding us back, because the mind is again constantly drawn into the senses by the life currents. Now, Kriya Yoga, as Yogananda ji shares in this book, is the scientific method of untying the flow of this life force of prana with that thinking mind, by directing the prana inward into the astral spine and drawing it to this point, at the point between the eyebrows. Now, it is a breathing technique. It is a pranayam technique. It's not just a breathing technique. That's not the right word. The word pranayam is often translated as breathing technique, but again, the word prana is actually referring to energy or life force. So, pranayam literally means a technique or a way to control that life force or that energy. Kriya Yoga is a pranayam technique, but it's a subtler one. We do use the physical breath, but what we are in essence doing is pulling that physical breath away from the periphery into the deeper astral spine, and we start rotating consciously that energy through the spine using our will, using the power of concentration. And what does that do? How does this go back to living by choice and not by chance? What it does, it starts to fundamentally transform all those seeds of habit patterns, the patterns that are holding us back. Because, again, I'm not going to all the details of the metaphysics and the yogic anatomy here, but all these preconception, all that commitment we have to finding happiness outside is deeply lodged in that personality, in that astral personality that we all hold. When we are able to consciously move energy there, we are able to work on a fundamental level, and we realize even within a few months, a year, what to speak of a decade or two of practice, that we now have fundamentally transformed. It's not like the situations in our life have now changed drastically, but our responses to them have changed. Just yesterday, I was in a class, and the students were sharing some thoughts about their meditation practice and such. And one of the students shared a very beautiful story. Just 3 days ago, she was actually in a car accident, and she said, and it was very dramatic because the person who was actually at fault, he tried to flee the scene and police was involved and there was a chasing involved, and then now she's still dealing with all the repercussions of insurance and dealing with her broken car and all of this. And at the end of it, she shared, it was a very traumatic experience. It was not easy. And I have to be honest, the first 10 minutes when it happened, I was very shaken, I was very rattled. But I noticed within 10 minutes, I was able to grab myself, I was able to get a hold of myself, and was able to navigate that situation with a greater sense of calmness. And she said that wouldn't have been possible if I had not committed this past year of my life to these practices, to meditating twice every day, to going deeper within oneself, to these teachings that these great masters have brought to us. Now that is the sacred key. That is the key that Lahiri gave Babaji, that Yogananda brought to the West. This key that when we are able to work at the level of energy, when we are able to refine our awareness of who we are, and when we are able to not only become aware, but start to control and move that energy consciously, then we are able to fundamentally shift our sense of identity and our personality itself. Then we are no longer stuck in that reactive process all the time. Life situations still happen. We still don't get the things we want. We still have difficult relationships to navigate. We still have money problems. We still have health issues that we have to find solutions for. But they don't rattle us in that same way. We have a sense of calmness. We have a sense of acceptance. And that is not something that somebody can just speak to you about. You read in a book that I'm supposed to accept my situations and I'm going to deal with life with calmness and clarity. Well, it is not as easy as that. You just don't become somebody else. The problems are so overwhelming, it blinds our eyes. We cannot see properly. Now, Kriya Yoga does not take this blind away, but what it gives us, it takes you farther back, deeper into our own inner center, that this problem is still there, but it is just a part of a much larger picture. What is God trying to teach me through this car accident? What is God trying to teach me through this illness that I'm suffering? What am I supposed to learn through this difficult relationship that I'm having to deal with? We start asking a different question rather than, I just want to get away from it. I don't want this. Rather, we shift our perspective, and that is the change. That is the only transformation that takes us closer to finding that intoxicating scent of musk. And it is the only way we can move in the direction of living by choice and not by chance. Now, I feel like I've spoken more than I even wished to. Before waiting too long, I want to share the link. Lakshmi is going to copy this in the chat window. I'll also repeat it just for the sake of the video since I'm speaking. It's anandapaloalto.org/Kriya Kriya ebook, /Kriya ebook. You can note down this URL or copy it from the chat window. If you enter your name and email there, we will email you the copies of the 2 ebooks. The first one is the Autobiography of Yogi. Again, if you have not picked it up yet, certainly you can read the ebook, but I would recommend this is a book that you would treasure for the rest of your lifetime. So get a physical copy from East West, whether it's online or in person. And the other book is called The Sacred Science of Kriya Yoga. It is not actually a book that is authored by anyone. It is just a collection of writings from Paramhansa Yogananda and Swami Kriyananda, who I didn't get to mention, but he's the founder of Ananda and he was a direct disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda, who taught these teachings of Kriya Yoga throughout his life. So you can get those 2 books for free. And before I leave, I'll also tell you, I know I've been talking a lot of philosophy for the last 50 minutes. If you're interested in learning more, you can reach out to me directly. We have 2 meditation classes that are being offered in the month of October. One is online and one will be in person. We would love to have all of you join us, whether you're able to come in person or you can do it over Zoom. They happen on 2 different nights. It's not a hybrid class. So the online class will be its own separate curriculum that we will learn meditation for 4 weeks, and the in-person class will happen here at the Ananda Temple in Palo Alto. So whatever works for you, please come join us. And even if you just want to test it out, if you just want to attend the first class for free, you're very welcome to before you sign up. Meditation and everything that we'll be sharing the basic technique of meditation as taught by Yogananda in the tradition of Kriya Yoga, and it'll be the first step in moving in that direction. Kriya Yoga, although is given to all sincere seekers, it does require that one have that refined, subtler understanding of energy and of meditation itself before they can receive the technique. So it takes about 10 months to a year of study and regular meditation practice before one can learn Kriya Yoga. And Yogananda taught a lot of other techniques as well on this path to Kriya Yoga. So we gradually learn these techniques and we practice them over a period of 10 months. And then Kriya is not taught in a classroom. It is actually taught as an initiation because it is coming through a lineage of gurus. So all that is just briefly telling you the logistics if you're interested in learning actually how to do it. So I welcome all of you, get those 2 ebooks and feel free to, my email is very simple as well. It's Saiganesh, SAIGANES, at Saiganesh at anandapaloalto.org. If you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out, and certainly feel free to join us in our beginning meditation class. Even if you don't think of yourself as a beginning meditator, this might be a helpful way to give some perspective on your existing meditation practice. It's not even called beginning meditation. I have to correct myself. This class is called Inspire Your Meditation Practice. And that's really what we'll be doing through those 4 weeks, where we will try to refresh and review our understanding of what meditation is. We will practice together. We will study the teachings of Yogananda and of this tradition of Kriya Yoga as to how it relates with meditation. And whether or not this is your path and you're interested in learning Kriya Yoga, I can say with a lot of confidence that it will inspire whatever existing practice you have. So with that, I'm going to invite my friend Lakshmi to lead us in a brief 10 or 15-minute experience of a meditative practice, very similar to what we practice as the beginning meditation on this path. And after that, I'll come back up on stage. We don't have a lot of time for Q&A tonight. As I said, you're always welcome to reach out to me or even Lakshmi, whose email, again, is very simple, lakshmi@anandapaloalto.org. You can reach out to either of us at any time. But I will be able to take a couple of questions if you have anything that you want to ask. I think it'll just be easier if you type those questions. You don't have to do it now. After the next 10 minutes in the chat window, then Lakshmi will be able to ask me, and I'll be back here again, and we can have 5 or 10 minutes of discussion before we close out. So now I'll invite Lakshmi to lead us in a brief meditative experience.
Good evening, everyone. I've been back behind the camera, so I feel like I've been with you and watching you as we've been listening to Saiganesh so beautifully speak about this somewhat esoteric concept. What does it mean to find that space of inner bliss, to find that musk that's permeated from the very center of our being, and to work with energy in order to do that? And what we're going to do now is have an experience of that and listen to the ways and explore the ways that we can actually use the physical aspect of the breath, watching the breath, calming the breath, in order to coax that state of deeper inner peace and stillness that Saganesh was speaking about. And through that state of inner peace and stillness, what we find as we continue to deepen our meditations is that from that space of stillness blossoms that inner bliss, that inner peace that he was speaking to, that the musk deer are in pursuit of so drastically that they're falling from the cliffs and the high cliffs and the trees in the Himalayan mountains. So let's begin just by focusing in on and bringing awareness to the way that we're feeling right now in this moment. Perhaps as it's the end of the day, we're starting to feel a little bit tired and drowsy. Perhaps we're just laying back in our chairs or in our seats. Maybe we're lying down in bed as we're listening to this talk tonight. Whatever it is, let's just begin to bring awareness to the mental state and to the physical state of the body. Any places we're holding tension, any places that we're holding mental tension and worry. And just begin to tune into that. How are you feeling right now in this moment? And recognizing through all of what Sai Ganesh was talking about in the science of Kriya Yoga, that there are steps, there are techniques that we can use. There are actual practices that we can tap into, which can begin to help us to coax deeper states of awareness, deeper states of relaxation, deeper states of peace and joy. And what we're going to do in order to explore that is to focus on the breath, because there's an intimate connection between the mind and the breath. All of what Sai Ganesh was feeling and how our energy, our prana, that chi, that life force gets drained out through our sensory activity, through our mental exhaustion, through all of the busyness of life. What we can do is listen to the breath and use the breath to help to coax us into those deeper states of stillness, to begin to let go, to create that veil between that sensory drain and that mental drain and buzz of the busyness of our lives, simply by focusing on the breath. Because as the breath begins to calm, the body follows and ultimately the mind follows. And of course, we know this is true if you watch a little child who's in distress and agitated, and their breath is heaving and they're crying with sobs of anger or frustration, and the breath is as agitated as the mental state. Versus if you watch a newborn baby, as Sai Ganesh was telling us stories about those newborn babies and the deep, calm breathing that comes from the belly, that source of deep relaxation that we feel when you see the belly expand and contract. And in any moment, any situation in our life, we can use this tool of the breath to help us to go from those states of agitation with a heaving breath of a tantrum to calm down and to come back to those places of stillness and to come back to those places of relaxation. So the first thing that we'll do as we have our meditation practice today is just focus on our posture. However you are sitting, in a chair, on the floor, whatever is preferable to you is fine. But what we want to focus on is the trunk of the body, this astral spine, which is running somewhat parallel. We can tune into the physical spine to begin to tune into that astral spine. And we don't want to be laying back in bed or leaning forward or hunched over. We want to open the chest and create a nice easy flow for that energy, which we're going to begin to watch as we focus on the breath, to flow up and down the spine. So let's just find a seated position in a chair or on the floor, whichever you prefer, but see if we can keep the trunk of the body, the spine lengthened and lifted and relaxed, the chest open. We need to do a few shoulder rotations in order to allow the chest to be open. We're not holding tension, but just relaxing the shoulders back, chest open. And ultimately, what we want to do is bring our gaze behind closed eyelids to the point between the eyebrows. As Sai Ganesh was referencing, the point between the eyebrows physiologically is the prefrontal lobes, that place of problem solving and solution-oriented mentality, that place of kindness and compassion. All of that reacting from that place of expansion. It is born in the prefrontal lobes. And so this is the seat of expansion in the body. So when we're meditating and when we're tuning into that energetic flow, we want to bring our gaze and our concentration to that point between the eyebrows, to that seat of expansion in the body. And so for today, we can just close the eyelids and just begin to tune into that point between the eyebrows. Imagine yourself looking out at a distant horizon, perhaps a beautiful sunset scene or a beautiful mountain scene. The eyes are relaxed, shoulders relaxed, back is relaxed. The whole body is just calm behind the closed eyelids. But as Sai Ganesh was saying, we're bringing energy, we're bringing concentration and focus to it. Meditation is not a passive practice. We bring our attention and our concentration to everything that we do in our meditation. And so from this state, what we're going to do is work on relaxing the body and releasing all of the tension from the body. So we're going to practice a technique that Swami Kriyananda and Paramhansa Yogananda taught, double breathing, which is where we inhale through the nose and exhale through the mouth. You can hear it's quick, quick, slow, slow. In through the nose. And we pair that with a wave of tensing the body. So as we inhale, we tense the body in a wave and consciously relax the muscles and allow the energy to flow out. Again, tense the body in a wave, hold the tension, and once more. And relaxing all lingering tension. Allowing the shoulders to relax down, the back and spine lengthened and lifted, arms resting in the lap, our eyes focused behind closed eyelids. Now that we've awakened that energy and released the tension, let's work to calm the energy and to find that space of even-mindedness, of peace. And so we'll practice even count breathing, inhaling through the nostrils to a count of 4, holding the breath for a count of 4, and then exhaling for a count of 4. As we begin even count breathing and we find that measured pace with the inhalation and the exhalation, what we're practicing is neutralizing. We're actually working to neutralize the heart's feelings and the emotional tensions that we can hold, because again, the breath is a reflection of the energy that's flowing in the body. And as we can neutralize that energy with an even inhalation, hold, and exhalation, we're also beginning to neutralize those heart's feelings and all of those tensions that drain us out, that energy that's leaving our body through that sensory impulse. And we're beginning to work on coaxing that energy in. So let's exhale together and inhale to a count of 4. Hold. Exhale. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Once more, inhale. Hold. Exhale. And now with this exhalation, just allow the breath to begin to flow freely. We release any control over the breath. Just begin to tune into the belly as it expands with the inhalation and contracts with the exhalation. Become aware of where the breath is rooted. Where does that breath begin? Is it deep in the belly, that diaphragmatic breathing? Feeling it expand like a balloon and contract with the exhalation. Just become deeply aware and curious of the way the breath is moving, whether it's deep or shallow. Just tune into the exhalation and inhalation. And now, as you continue to inhale and exhale, become aware of the sensation of the wind moving in the nostrils on the inhalation, and exhaling through the nostrils on the exhalation. Just become aware of that sensation of breath, drawing it up to the very tip of the bridge of the nose, which is that point between the eyebrows. We have the belly expanding, chest is open and relaxed, and just become aware of that subtle breath, the wind that's created on the inhalation and exhalation. If the mind begins to wander, just bring it back to the inhalation and exhalation. The sensation, the expansion of the belly like a balloon, the contraction on the exhalation, the rise and fall in the chest, the slight sensation of wind in the nostrils. The only thing that matters is the breath. We just watch it expand and contract. And on the next exhalation, let's just drop the practice of watching the breath. Just tune into the way that you feel. Tune into the body. Any places that you were holding tension at the start of the practice, perhaps they've melted away. Tune into the heart's feelings and any irritations, worries, preoccupations that may have been resting there prior to the practice, prior to this evening. Have they shifted? Just asking yourself, introspecting and inquiring, what do I feel right now in this moment? Can we feel the energy as it's withdrawn out of the sensory buzz, the thoughts, the worries, out of the to-do lists? And as we watched the breath, it began to still and become calmer. Maybe even the breath now, it doesn't feel to be as dramatic, it's just shallow. We'll just stay here for half a minute longer. Tuning into whatever sensations, peace, joy, calmness, whatever arises in us as we begin to still that energy, draw that energy into that deep astral spine. And when you're ready to, you can open the eyes, come back into the space, and I'll invite Sai Ganesh up to take any questions that you may have about Kriya Yoga or Ananda or any of our meditation practices that we practiced today.